So today on A Critic's Journey, I want to take a look at the follow-up film to the Wog Boy. In the last episode, we took a look at the Wog Boy. Now today I want to take a look at the follow-up film that came out a decade later, the Kings of Mykonos, Wog Boy 2. Now, this is a pretty hard film to find on streaming platforms. If you are looking for it, you will have to type in the Kings of Mykonos and not Wog Boy 2. Because that's what actually brings up this film, is looking for the Kings of Mykonos. Now, this is an interesting film because the first time I watched it, I really hated it. But I went back and watched it again this week in readiness for Wog Boys Forever, and this time I kind of liked it. Now, it's directed by Peter Andrikidis and once again written by Nick Giannopoulos and Chris Anstinides. And like I said, watching it the second time, I kind of liked it. Now, basically what happens in this film is Steve, played by Nick Giannopoulos, and Frank, played by Vince Colosimo, travel to Mykonos after Steve receives the news that his uncle has passed away and that he is to inherit his uncle's property, which involves a beach and a taverna. Now, standing in his way is Mihaly, played by Alex Dimitriadis, a rich businessman who owns a huge chunk of the coastline of Mykonos, and he wants to extend that, and he's doing all he can to try and stop Steve from being able to get his inheritance. Now, the side story here is that Frank has kind of lost his mojo since his marriage has fallen apart, and he meets the man who is known as the King of Mykonos, Pierre Luigi, played by Kevin Sorbo. And Frank decides that he wants to try and take his title, which proves to be harder than possible, because both Frank and Steve are not having a lot of luck with the women these days. Now, those women include Zoe, played by Zita Makripouli, and Enza, played by Cosima Coppola. Now, this is an interesting film because it kind of takes less of a comedic approach that the first film had. There are a couple of comedic characters in there still, like Tony the Yugoslav turns up. But this film, for the most part, kind of centers around the drama of what is happening with Steve's family as he's learning more and more about his past and what that does to him. It also centers a lot around Steve and Frank and what they're going through in their personal lives. So it's probably not the outrageous comedy that the first film is. But having said that, I think this film actually lacks towards the end of the film when it does start to go down that comedy path. Because for the most part of this film, it kind of is a film that works because it is dramatic. It explores men's mental health as they head into some of the issues. It also looks at what it means to belong to a family and what that can mean when things are suddenly turned upside down for you, which is what Steve is going through. And for me, the film works the best at those points. It's when this film at the end decides to go for the outrageous comedy that I feel that it actually starts to lack a little bit. Which is interesting. Now, the other thing that stands out with this film, of course, is the views, the scenery. Absolutely fantastic shots of Mykonos. It makes you want to go there when you're actually watching the film. What else can I say about this film? Like I said, it's one of those films where my entire feeling of this film kind of changed after I sat down to watch it the second time. The acting is really good. Nick Giannopoulos, I think he's one of those underrated actors in Australia who can go from doing comedy to drama quite easily, and that shows in this film. Vince Colosimo, as we all know, he can definitely do drama. We know him from Underbelly and shows like that, but here he also touches on that, but probably not as much as Nick Giannopoulos. And I think that's the key to this film. Going into this film is don't expect this to be the outlandish comedy that the first film was. Go into this film expecting it to be very different. I think that's what actually dragged down my thoughts on this film originally. I think I went into this film expecting it to be the comedy that the first film wasn't. I didn't expect for it to have tinges of drama. I also think that I've possibly matured more as a film journalist over the last decade as well. Like, the first time I watched this movie was 12 years ago. So going back and watching it again, I think I got more out of it watching it the second time. I understood more about what it's like being a middle-aged male, and I think that kind of thing really spoke to me. But like I said, this film actually does have its best scenes when it's trying not to be funny. I think there's some really, really important scenes in this film between Steve and also his family that he meets in Mykonos, especially Zimi, played by Demetrius Starovas. It really does he has some really meaningful scenes with him, and I think they're the most powerful parts of this film. There's also some great scenes between Vince Colosimo and Cosima Coppola as well, where you see Frank changing as a character, and I think that is something that's really important with this film. It quite often gets overlooked, that there are dramatic moments in this film that really work. Alex Dimitriadis is great as the villain in this piece, but again, when it gets to the overacting kind of comedy parts at the end of this film, it kind of lapses a little bit. So, look, go into this film expecting it to be a little bit different to the original Wog Boy film, and I don't think you'll be as disappointed as I was the first time. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5. I still think that the ending kind of suffers a little bit because of the fact that it tries to be too funny at the end. But yeah, definitely worth a look, especially if you're going to see Wog Boys Forever. I'm going to give the Kings of Mykonos 3 out of 5.